Arganissima, New York. Your exotic skin, hair, and beauty source, and your one-stop shop for all your natural and organic skin and hair care, featuring authentic organic Moroccan oil and prickly pear seed oil and much more. Bringing you only the best, straight from the source and proudly produced in the USA. So what are you waiting for? Shop today at www.arganissima.com. Arganissima, New York. Your beauty is our...
Folks, welcome back to the iHealth channel, iHealth Radio, with your host, Hurricane H. New day, new show, new topic. And we're going to stay in the realm of innovation, in the realm of technology, in the realm of medical tools and resources that is used for, in the technological world, in the healthcare system, period. And I have someone with me who actually does advise consultant to companies and folks that are into that type of piece of healthcare. And again, I'm not giving all the details because I'd like to allow her to give us more about it. But really, the idea is that we talk about different aspects of the healthcare all the time in different shows. And, sometimes we go physical, medical, you name it. But we tend to not talk a lot about the technology behind, the medical and the healthcare, services that we receive anywhere. And so today we're going to actually take a pause and talk about those things and how they work and what are the types out there, between the difference between tech versus devices and so on and so forth. We'll talk about all that. So I have my expert with me today, and she is actually her own company. I mean, she runs a company that is hers, and she does the work to promote, these services and to help people understand this more, and we'll understand more of this from her. So without any further ado, I have with me Nicole Coustier, and she is going to talk to us a little bit about what I try to explain, and we're going to guide it from there. So welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
No, my pleasure. And, when we connected, I felt that there was definitely a need for clarity and clarification on really the world of health tech in general, how it all operates. And it's a different angle. And I know for a fact, anyone listening, watching, they've probably been to a hospital, to a medical doctor, and, they do have, devices, they do have technology that makes things happen. And sometimes we don't even know the extent of how that works and what it does and how important it is. But before we get into all that, if you don't mind, Nicole, talk to us a little bit just about your background and your involvement in this technology space, and how long and all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in this space for a really long time. So it's a little embarrassingly long, but something that I'm proud of. So I actually started out in infectious disease and environmental health and working for the government and working with the CDC. And then I got the bug to learn about technology innovation as applied to healthcare in the life sciences industry. And I was hooked. I just loved learning about innovative technologies, how we're advancing patient care, and how we are being more efficient, more effective at treating patients and addressing diseases. And I was a consultant in that space for a long time, 16 years. And I launched lots of products in medical devices and molecular diagnostics and biotech. And my job primarily was to get these new medical technologies covered by insurance companies. So my job was an uphill battle for 16 years, but a lot of successes, a lot of learnings. And what I did after those 16 years is I decided to do two things. So I kind of split, and I decided to create a health tech advisory where I started to help investors and founders really kind of validate some of their assumptions about how healthcare works in the US, so that as they're developing their products, they actually have an eye toward all of the headache that can come later on, and see if they can address that stuff up front and kind of prevent a lot of the headache. I say headache in quotes, the headache that it can be to get those things covered by insurance companies. You can actually address a lot of that stuff up front. And so I started doing that work. And then I started actually my own executive coaching firm too, because the reality is, when you're a founder, when you're in a startup, when you're trying to do all of this stuff and you have all these different stakeholders at the table and you're trying to please all these people, you need a sanity check sometimes. And so I kind of coupled those two areas of expertise. And so that's where we are today.
Wow, well, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot of grounds to cover, and definitely a lot of rich background. And we're gonna try to expand in there, right? Well, the first things first. I mean, I have to say, I don't get a lot of folks that worked at the CDC,
Yeah.
and so that's got to be a unique experience in its own. I mean, I know, and that's the other thing. CDC is known as just disease control, but there is more to it. I mean, they use tech. I'm pretty sure. And that's actually how was that experience, by the way? Just curiosity.
Yeah. So I worked for a local government entity, and we were reporting in and coordinating with the CDC on a number of different initiatives.
Got it.
And I mean, it was, going and presenting at the CDC in front of, an international body of experts. It can be pretty intimidating for somebody who is just out of school. And so it was a wonderful experience in the sense that it was personally very groundbreaking, right? I had an opportunity where I was totally out of my comfort zone, but also to be able to interact with just brilliant people who are doing this to advance, information, data science, knowledge, how to translate that into changing behavior in the community, right? So it was just a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to work with brilliant people and see how people make decisions. What are their considerations? What's the rationale behind some of the decision making? It was a truly insightful time.
Wow, I mean, that's got to be a what do you call it, like a boot camp training?
Yeah, a little bit.
I mean, really coming
Yeah.
in. I'm sorry, going into it, and you're meeting with some top-notch people, and to your point, worldwide, you have to meet the expectation. That's always hard. And at the same time, it's for you, it's a big learning experience. And I'm going to give an example that may be totally far-fetched from where you were, but it's almost the same concept in a different world. So I came from the tourism industry, and I went into the first job I had was at Disney. Really the best of the best in the industry, right? So for me, it was a super experience, boot camp training in like magic, in everything else. So once you get that, I mean, it's a foundation that you can never, get rid of. And it sticks with you for a long term. And I think that makes a big difference where you start at the onset of your career path anyways, whatever path you take. So even for audiences, whatever you do, if you can land in a place where they can give you that nice little baseline, everything. That's it. I mean, the rest is you basically get all that boost, skyrocket, baby. so that's
true. And I completely agree with you. And the one thing that I learned just being a part of that experience so young in my career, so early in my career, was how focused on the end game everybody was, right? So it was very goal oriented. And I took that into a corporate environment, right? And so, you hear stories all the time of people, they're working 8 hours a day, but 5 of those 8 hours, they're in meetings and calls and what is getting done? And, what are we trying to do here? So much of what I learned in those early experiences is to be very end game focused, right? And if we're not really moving the ball downfield, then, the only other thing that we're doing here is wasting time. That's it. Either we're making progress or we're wasting time. There's no gray area, right? So you have to decide which category are we in when we're spending this time. And those are some of the lessons that I learned in those very early stages.
Nicole, we're in the same frequency. As a matter of fact, I I can resonate to that very much, because I've always wondered, like, why there are too many meetings in all the different, in the world.
Right.
There's some meetings are just to decide when the next meeting is going to happen and what we're going to discuss on the agenda items, right?
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, but that's just part of the culture. And I did come, a conclusion to that, dilemma. And I think what it is that people have to justify the existence in the space of any work. And, when you don't have something tangible that you can produce, in metrics, you have to kind of compensate with that you're busy. And so it create those opportunities. Now, that's my opinion, and people may disagree with it, but that's okay. I've had, 28 years of corporate, living. I can tell you it's real, and it is what it is. And depending on what part of the corporate end you're in, you will realize that exactly what it is. And you're right. There's doers and there's talkers, and we can be talking all the time, but at the end of the day is the end result that matters. We can, that's the other thing. Like, we can get shortcuts and get to the bottom line. Let's see what's going on, or we can just kind of like sugarcoat it and go do a dance around it, and that's it. It's unfortunate, but it's not really the topic for the discussion. But since you mentioned it, I think it's important, because people are listening in, and they probably experience similar, end of whatever end they're in. They'll probably see it, and they're like, why is it I'm being called to a lot of meetings? You sit at meetings. And you find that meeting is just going for hours, but there's nothing being established or finalized, right? It is what it is.
And one thing that to bring it back around, one of the things that I've learned over my career is, especially in healthcare, you have all these different stakeholders that are at the table, right? You have the patients and the patient advocates, and then you have the physicians and the hospitals, and then you have the health plans and Medicare, and then you have industry, the technology people. So you have all these different stakeholders, and they all want what's best. Like, I don't even think it's worth arguing. Like, everybody wants what's best. But the issue is, when you ask, well, we're in meetings and what's the end game here? Every one of those stakeholders, they have different perspectives. They have different priorities. They have a different mandate. I mean, their job at the table, the decisions that they have to make and their perspectives that they're bringing are fundamentally different than anybody else's. And so it's one thing that I've learned in all of this time is, and one thing that I try to do with my advisory, is to bridge that perspective, right? So if the patient and the patient advocate understands a little bit more where the physician's coming from, and the physician understands a little bit more where the insurance plan is coming from, and the technology company understands, if different stakeholders can kind of understand and appreciate the different perspectives, it is going to be easier to bridge those things and achieve the goal, which is to improve patient care. And it's just, that's the nature of the US healthcare system, that you have all these stakeholders at the table, and they're all showing up to do different things.
Well, Nicole, I think that's not necessarily just for the US. I think that's all over the world. And some parts probably worse and some parts better. I don't know. But you're right. I mean, and it's funny, because almost everybody that you mentioned, then I have somehow been in some of those meetings.
Yeah,
because,
I'm sure.
Because I'm in the insurance side. So obviously we have us, one of those bodies, and you have the providers usually in place. Sometimes you even have some members in there, the regulatory bodies. And I've been actually in some state, meetings where, back in the days I was in New York, and we had some Medicaid design teams that we were discussing the whole thing about, the Medicaid, Child Health Plus, and all those things in New York State. So, and you had people from the plans, from regulatory, from the state, and from legislation. So it was just kind of a little crazy. And it happens even in the regular world, when you have just different departments working together.
Right. It's true.
So, but to your point, when everybody is in there, they have a mission, they have their own vision of what they need to come out with as an outcome. that is benefiting their entity, and therefore that's the problem. So if we're not working for a common goal, sometimes that's the problem. But if we focus on one, target, and we all are interested in that being the bottom line, I think that makes a big difference. But I mean, listen, we're talking about just, some of the nuances of the business that we're in and healthcare in general. But it's very similar to a lot of other industries, but it gets a little trickier, you're right, because there's more regulation in healthcare. There's, there's just too many, there's profitability. there's all these factors that you have to actually look. And to your point, in talking about stakeholders at the high end,
Right.
they're interested in results and what's the profit margin is going to look like. And then when my, shareholders are going to, especially if you're a commercial plant, for example, and the providers, they own hospitals and things like that, whatever. And then you have also the ancillaries and the services. It's crazy. In tech, they obviously produce things to make money, right?
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. Although it's funny, I was talking to somebody else the other day about this, and it's like of all the different ways to make money in life, like shooting for like making a blockbuster drug is not the way to go. Like like the chances, like when you think of the funnel that a new product has to go through from initial inception, and then all the trials, and then the regulatory process, which you mentioned, and then like all the way down to like actually getting to market and then being a blockbuster, like, wow, there are way easier ways to make money than that. But you're absolutely right. Do companies make lots and lots of money with blockbuster products? Absolutely. Like, there's no question. But yeah, that's not the easiest path to take to that.
And Nicole, I had actually a guest who was a very good friend of mine and a mentor of mine, and he was in the pharma world for many years, and he had stated that he probably has been part of multiple products that were actually being put in place, and only a few of them really made it to the market.
That's right.
And really made the big bang and the big boom, and they become the hit, right? So there's a lot of that. You're right. But again, these companies also have super deep pockets, and they can do all that, and they have enough revenue from the other products to actually compensate. But you're right. The research and development, piece in itself is a long process, and there's a lot. I think that's what, and we don't want to shift from the discussion for today, but really in the last couple of years with the pandemic, with the vaccine and everything, one of the reason there's a lot of debate about it is because we know how long it takes usually for anything to happen, and the trials and everything. And this happened to be quick. So there's a lot of, question about it. And I think that's caused more headaches across the world and created the divide. Right. But listen, it is a necessary evil, as they say. It's part of the process.
It's unusual times, right? Yeah.
It is. Well, so I, we can literally just, link this discussion into the real concept that we're discussing today about the health tech and the medical devices and stuff. But I do want you to, if you don't mind, to elaborate on what are some of those components of the health tech in general. It's a pretty very large scale, I think, title. It's a big concept, and we can maybe break it down to like the different levels and what they are. There's technology that is physical as in terms of devices. There's technology that is software based, and all the tools that can be used. So if you don't just break us, if there's a category list or something you can share in terms of just like what they are, just to bring to the audience closer to the concept, because some may just know it as, okay, there's technology there. Okay, good. What is it? How does it work?
Yeah. Well, the way I typically think about it when clients come to me is three categories, maybe four. One is therapeutics, one is diagnostics, and one is supportive or adjacent technologies, right? Things like software, or things that are in the operating suite and stuff like this that is not considered the intervention, right? And so each of those categories are kind of subject to different levels of data requirements to be FDA approved, to be covered by insurance companies and things like that. So that's generally how I think of health tech. What category do they fall into? And based on that category, what types of questions will they need to answer? What issues will they come up with? The application of artificial intelligence to healthcare, it really does depend on what category is the AI being applied to. So for example, a lot of AI is being applied to the diagnostic realm, like imaging, for example, right? Can AI be better at predicting what can happen to the patient, and can AI be used as a lever in imaging and other types of diagnostics and laboratory diagnostics in order to better diagnose the patient? Maybe. Is more information good? Maybe. How does that, these are the types of questions that if you fall into that category, we've got to explore, and we've got to be able to answer for some of the stakeholders that are at the table that I mentioned earlier.
Well, thank you, Nicole. And well, I just want to almost backtrack for a minute, but I just wanted to just claim this is that I maybe I mentioned something to this effect, but really what I want to convey right now is the idea that medicine and healthcare in general, without the tech, could be literally traveling back in time.
It is.
I mean, the technology is what makes, the advancement, the actual results, the speed of the results, the speed of diagnosis and prognosis and treatment and all the stuff, the tools that I guess the healthcare workers at all levels have in their hands to be able to do things, to perform better.
Right.
You're talking about diagnostics and MRIs, CAT scans, all these things. A few decades back, those things were very expensive, or there was very little access to them in the first place. If you needed to do a CAT scan, you have to go to a different place in a different state, and maybe you're lucky to get in. Now it's readily and very, very available to almost everyone, at a cost, of course, and even the cost have literally the costs have shifted, big time and plummeted down. I mean, they really declined, and it's not as expensive as it used to be.
Yeah.
But so the importance of technology is vital. It's important that we highlight that and understand that it's a need and it's a must. It's not going anywhere. But understanding today some of the concepts behind it, how it operates, and to your point, the stakeholders, how they see it, and what is the process to really even establish these things, and the parameters for use and pricing and all that stuff. So you wanted to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, well, to answer that question, one of the things to think about, or one lens to use as you think about health tech, is a lot of health tech is designed to help people make better decisions, right? A lot of that involves more information, right? Or you're taking data that exists and you're collating it, slicing and dicing it. You're doing something different in order to make the data more accessible, to make it friendlier, to simplify it, to do other things to it in order, again, to help make better decisions. So, we can talk about lots of different technologies, both historical and what's out there now. There are beautiful case studies for how tech has really improved patient care and that decision making. But that's what it comes down to, right? Is how do we get better at blank? And so it's about information, it's about decision making, and that's what it really does boil down to.
Well, Nicole, that's true, and that's fact. But I know that is not easy. And the reason I know that is just simply because we just mentioned earlier how many people and bodies are involved in some of these things, right? And so information has also to be correct and available somehow. Somebody has to put the information together. The data, you can only get data based on what you put in the first place. But if you put in the stuff or you don't capture things correctly in the first place, and that's a problem. So what are some of the challenges that you've encountered in this particular, realm that I'm just describing right now?
Well,
if any,
a really good example that keeps coming up again and again and again for health tech is the difference between the type of data and the type of decision making that's made, say, at the FDA, versus at health plans or insurance companies of Medicare, for example. Two totally different mandates, right? They're looking at totally different things for approving a new technology. And, a lot of patients say, well, I don't understand why we can't give grandma this technology. It's covered by, the FDA approved it, right? What do you mean I can't have it for my grandma? And, one very important distinction is that the FDA looks at things like safety and efficacy, right? Basically, does it harm the patient? We don't want it to harm the patient. And does the device, for example, do what you want to claim it does, right? So this is for marketing, right? If you want to put a product out on the market, right? The FDA says, tell me what claim you want to make, and then we'll look at the data and say if you can make that claim. Now, the insurance company says, well, that's all fine and good, but that's not our mandate. Our mandate is, does the patient get better?
Right.
Right? Does the patient go back to work? Do they have fewer adverse events? Do their pain medications go down? And so again, totally different, right? But you need to address both. But just because something goes through the FDA doesn't necessarily mean that, say, Medicare is going to cover it. And part of what, I've been doing for many years is to bridge that gap. Like, you're going to go through the FDA process anyway. You're going to be collecting data. Why not collect data for both parties? Right? That is possible. You can work in the FDA and Medicare, for example, have, done a lot of work to try and, get on the same page. But again, that Venn diagram, that overlap isn't huge because they have totally different mandates.
Well, I can tell you about Medicare because that's my world.
You say more than anybody.
I work with, me personally, not direct. We do deal with them. We have our own account managers and things like that on the CMS and all that. But overall in the health plans world, and I've been involved in some of those, discussions that it especially when we start doing benefit design and things like that. And, to your point, I can give you a purse, just as simple, this Medicaid covers it. Do we need to cover it? We shouldn't be covering it. Some of this stuff, decisions I've made, and more so the patients, they don't even know how and why. But there is a background to those discussions, because to your point, if you're subsidized by Medicare, and Medicare is giving you X amount of dollars to cover certain categories and things like that, now you have to be creative on what to offer in those particular parameters, and that makes it very difficult. And you're right, how to explain that to patients or members. Oh, we're just taking this benefit away. Oh, but we can't, because we have no choice because of XYZ. And then to your point, there's the other part is this going to make any improvement? If yes, and your health's going to be better, that means we're going to have less cost. Because again, let's talk, insurance is about cost.
It is. It's like any other insurance, right?
Exactly.
Car insurance, renter's insurance, homeowner's insurance. Same.
That's right. If the risk is higher and you have too much, utilization, the companies can go, bust basically, and bankrupt. So there you have to mitigate that risk and kind of, but you have to see whether there's validity to this. Is it going to support the care plan and it's going to help this person be more active? I give you nothing to do with devices, but for example, when maybe it could be added to that, but like, for example, in the plan I worked, the gym membership is a big deal.
Yeah.
And so, but we gave them things to use at home, as opposed to going to the gym, for example.
Yeah, sure.
So we gave them a whole kit, like a gym kit to operate. And the purpose was to keep these folks in a healthier mode and active and so on and so forth. Therefore, less, better cardio, less, cholesterol, better diabetes, And so, but there's that we can apply that same rule in medical devices and other things. Some people want a scooter, and Medicare is big about that. Not all the plans cover scooters, and you have to figure out what kind of level, and do you need a regular one? Do you need a power? So it makes it difficult. So plans have their own challenges too. I'm not defending the plans, by the way. I'm just saying, giving a little bit of an example of where the decision can be a little bit convoluted. So
No, I totally agree. And I think we're saying the same thing, which is depending on which seat you have to sit in, you have a mandate, you have priorities, you have a perspective, and you have a job to do. Now, the ultimate goal is to advance patient care, true. But
Ultimate.
yeah, but that's ultimate, right? And the pathway to get there as a stakeholder is this particular path, and other stakeholders have a different path. So, in all of my work, the idea is to, surface what the different stakeholders need, what their perspectives and their mandates are. How do we bridge that versus somebody else's priorities, right? How do we collect data, present data, educate in a way that addresses everybody's needs so that there's a win-win and the technology actually gets out there, and not just any technology, but good technology with a lot of utility actually gets out there.
Well, we want that.
That's right.
So Nicole, that's a perfect, I guess segue to my next question, and that is, you mentioned earlier about how you help different owners of tech that to almost kind of figure things out in advance and avoid the headaches, right? And so first of all, let's talk about what types of owners and health tech type folks that you might be addressing, and really, like, what would be some of the things that they should be looking for? I mean, if someone's listening right now and they happen to want to be involved in, I don't know, diagnostic stuff and get involved in MRIs and whatever, or other types of even smaller, things. I mean, with the pandemic, everybody got involved with the PPEs and all the stuff, and it became a whole nightmare. I mean, there's that became a little bit crazy because people are utilizing different resources and sources from outside of the US, and it was a nightmare. But so in your world, some of the key elements that are maybe common for anyone, doesn't matter who, what, if you're coming into this world and you want to be part of it and you want to be like making some money out of it, what are some of the do's and some of the don'ts?
Yeah.
I know it's probably a wide question, but
no, it's perfectly fine. So the Coustier advisory works in two different stages, right? So when a product is about ready to commercialize, right, they need to get the word out. They need to, work with specialty societies. They need to probably a lot of those claims, those initial claims in the first, 18 to 24 months, those are going to get denied. We kind of know that's how it is with new technology. They're going to be denied. So how do we work with the doctor's offices and the hospitals to craft appeals to those denials so that we can educate the insurance company and work with the insurance company to say, we're not trying to get this covered for like everybody that has this disease, but in this particular case, doesn't it make sense for this patient to get that technology? And over time, what happens is people get a lot more comfortable with that new technology. They start to understand it more. They start to see more cases. They start to appreciate the differences in patient selection. And so there are a lot of programs that are developed there, whether it's patient advocacy or helping physicians and hospitals kind of get those things and educate lots of different stakeholders at that process. Now, separately, I work with very, very early stage people. So people, and a lot of times they're physicians, right? So they're either practicing physicians, they're academics. They notice a gap and they say, nobody else is working on this. I would really love it if blank. And so they decide they're going to develop something to fill that gap. And so there's a huge leap between having a great idea and actually making that great idea become something. Right. And so another thing that I do on the early stage stuff is in the pre-seed and seed stages is to help people validate some of their assumptions, right? Because from their lens, it's obvious, right? Of course we need this, but really there's some education, there's some additional validation that needs to occur before you can determine if that's a viable technology and should move forward.
And if the cost is going to warrant it, and is it going to be accessible, and but then again, it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about the insurance. So my question is, wouldn't it be a good point when someone in that level is trying to think something, maybe to actually get the buy-in of the insurance companies before coming up with something? Like,
no question.
That, I mean, I think that that would be, I can just imagine if someone walks in and says, you know what, we have this great idea. I think it's going to benefit your members.
That's right.
And guess what? It's going to save you a cost. I say, okay, sign me up. Let's talk. Right? It makes sense that way, right?
Well, absolutely. And, a lot of what I've done over the years is when companies say, we have this great technology and we're going to go through the FDA, and then, we think our technology is great and we think our data is great. And, basically for the payers, we're crossing our fingers and we're hoping that the payers agree with us. I'm like, you don't have cross your fingers is no kind of strategy, right? And I say in those early stages, why don't you ask them? Why don't you just go talk to the medical directors and say, look, this is our clinical trial design. These are the data that we're collecting. Is this going to meet your criteria for coverage? You can ask them. They will tell you, 3 months of follow-up is not enough. I need a little bit more. Or, the variables, the data outcomes that you're collecting are really about the device itself. But really, I want to know about what happens to the patients. Can you collect some data on that, right? They will tell you up front. It does not have to be a mystery.
Well, Nicole, that's an excellent point, because to your point, if they were to check in and maybe get not only the buy-in, as a matter of fact, if you ask any health plan, they'll probably tell you all the problems that they have.
Yeah, right.
And they'll give you find me a solution to this, and we'll be a partner for life. Right? I can just relate to that. I mean, you know of a lot of issues that happen with your members, whatever the case may be. And if you only have someone to actually come up with a solution that can make that happen and ultimately save you millions in cost in care, and that's really everybody's. And again, I tend to go back to the cost here, because on the insurance side, but really at the end of the beneficial, the most person that's going to get all the benefits is that patient or that member, because it's all geared to, it doesn't matter. Insurance still has to provide the care. The question is what kind of level of care, and if we can make their lives, in much, much better and healthier, and maybe make them mobile, in a better way, and live a longer life, and whatever devices, whether they're implanted, whether they're used, externally, it doesn't matter. Health plans will jump on that it's like hotcakes. They'll just take it.
Yeah, you're making such a great point here. And the way I talk about this in the kind of in the startup world or founders, even in other industries, even if it's not health tech, but it could be climate tech or ed tech or whatever it is. But there's this concept of the difference between solving a problem and solving a pain point. Right. So everybody will agree that, this is something that you're trying to solve for is a problem, right? So if you try to solve for a problem, everybody will say, oh, that's beautiful. Go for it. It's wonderful. Kudos for solving the problem. But not everybody will have a pain point associated with that problem. And if the pain isn't significant enough, you know what? They're not going to buy the thing. They just aren't. Now, conceptually and theoretically, right, on principle, we should be solving problems. But really, if you want the technology to move forward, you need to solve the pain point. And this whole concept of, hey, as a health plan, I can tell you about all my pain points. I would love for somebody to solve my pain points is a very, very important distinction.
Well, it is. And maybe we'll part of the discussion, maybe we can find a way to help people, get into it. But you're right. I mean, I sit in some of these meetings on the side. I mean, I'm in the sales end of it, right? So the first people that hear it all the time is us, because you're in the front, line with
Yeah.
patients and prospects and members.
Right.
And when our, agents do enroll people into the products, and anything that doesn't go their way, you know, you sign me up, you lied to me, misrepresented, all the above, right? So
Right.
we always kind of vouch and kind of like, advocate for our members, and we need this, we need that, we need this service, we need to keep them healthy and stuff like that. And at the same time, we want to make sure that they get the resources that they need. And I have to say, though, I don't get resistance. We never get resistance when it comes to like the ultimate goal, to your point, to really fix the pain point.
Yeah.
The problem is we only have a set of things that we have in our
Yeah.
arsenal that we can use. We have
Right.
excellent care managers, nurses that actually do, and I can advocate for them too. They really love their members and patients.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes they fight with us, because they really care so much about
Yeah.
the patient. So that's important to know. Now, again, this may vary a little bit from a commercial plan to a government plan and things like that, but
Right.
the base is almost the same, right? It's just who's paying for things, right?
Right.
and that's the other thing I think, since I meant who's paying, because when in the commercial world, guess who pays? It's the consumer.
That's right.
And so if there is introduction of anything, guess who pays that difference in price or that additional value? It's in your premium. So that becomes a little bit more difficult. In the government programs, it's a whole different world, because you only get in X amount of dollars per month per member, and the story, whether you like it or not. So
That's right.
manage it. Now, maybe there's categories, and if you code it correctly, you get a little extra dollars, but that's about it. So it changes dynamics from one type of health plans to the others. But the physicians today, and the health groups and the health facilities, there's a lot of synergy with health plans. I think there's more of that today. And and by the way, most of the health plans are kind of produced by particular providers. They're really owned by most of these doctors or these hospital systems. So there is that, because at the end of the day, it's just their payer, and they maintain, to make sure that their revenues are adequately, operating. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of discussion in all this, and they make sure that it's covered and it's working. But you're right, introducing a new device, a new technology, is not that easy. But you're right. If someone is having a discussion, having a roundtable about, the benefits, and you added a very great value, which is, what does that mean to those patients?
That's right.
Because you're right. I mean, we can do all the statistics and on how this is going to be good and potent, but what does that mean to the actual end user?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people who may wish that the US healthcare system were different, right? And there are a lot of people working on changes to that. And that's fine, and that's fantastic. But there is also a reality of the way things operate currently, right? And for patient access to new technologies, right? The question is, for all of those stakeholders, what questions do they have to answer? What are their pain points? And, how can technology developers address those pain points in order to ensure that those patients have access to all the work that they've put together to develop that technology? It's not enough that the technology is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Like, that's not enough. What are the pain points? What are the issues that the payer is dealing with? And what are what's the calculus that they go through in order to make their decisions? That stuff has to be taken into consideration.
But in the same aspect, this is a standard sales technique. And I'll make it that way, as simple as that, because we don't sell, you actually find the need, right? You have to assess the need.
That's
right. And
right.
similarly, if you're going to produce a device or tech, you need to assess what that need is, how it's going. So all your feasibility has to be there, and you have to know what ROI is going to be there, what's in it for them. If you don't, and I know that that's what you do. That's how you break it down to them. But the bottom line is, if we all, have some sort of an understanding of the concept, it will be easier. But then again, we would need you, right? We need you.
That's right. Listen, when I was a consultant, a lot of times, especially in the commercialization area, I used to build these programs, right, to appeal denied claims and to educate payers and to align the physicians and the patients and do all that kind of stuff. We used to say, if we did it right, we worked our way out of a job in 24 months. I mean, the whole point was alignment, right? I mean, I would love it. Listen, I would love it if I didn't have to keep going around and teaching people these things. That would mean that, yeah, there's greater alignment, there's more cohesion in how these different stakeholders are working together. I will go find something else to do. But for now, right, there's still a significant need. I want to educate people on the differences between these things, even if it's as simple as a patient saying, I don't know why grandma can't get that drug, right?
Oh, that's very common.
Very common.
Yeah.
But there's reasoning behind it, right? We can argue about whether it's good reasoning or bad reasoning, but it's not an arbitrary decision. And so getting the word out and making sure people understand how the inner workings of that happens in the US healthcare system. Yeah, there's still a need for that.
Well, Nicole, first of all, we do need you, and I don't think you're going anywhere. This is not going to dissipate anytime soon. This is going to be ongoing, and every time there's a new discovery, the new technology, new innovation, it's going to be in the same loop, and it's going to need people to really, work it around. But I did want, you mentioned claims a couple of times, and especially in the inception of the product and how you managed to produce those programs to promote the products, right, and market them. It is a question that I have, that if the company, the health tech company, is producing this and they did all the due diligence and now it's marketed and now it's happening, why is it that they already almost knowing that it's going to be many claims decline, but if they can possibly maybe work directly in getting the approvals before they can actually get the service? I mean, because I know health plans have authorizations, so you just, your primary doctor cannot just prescribe things. They have to go through the protocols, and health plans have, to your point, medical directors that will evaluate these requests. And if the request is valid and it makes sense, sure. So why would they still take the risk?
Yeah. So this is a fantastic question. So there are a couple of different reasons. The first is, if the company didn't know any better, if the company really believed that the data that they were going to the FDA with was sufficient enough for coverage, and, maybe they did a little bit of due diligence on that, but it's cross your finger strategy, then maybe from the health plan's perspective, the data just isn't good enough, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're just not going to cover it. Now, there are some, kind of the mechanics of how claims get processed and adjudicated. Like sometimes new technologies, it can take a couple of years before they get their own code to put on the claim form, right? And so now you're using this miscellaneous code, and then that gets kicked out because the software system says, well, I don't know what this technology is, right? So there can be a lot of different ways why it's just a slog in those first 18 to 24 months. It's just, and then payers have a cycle for when they review their policies and update policies. And if the next cycle doesn't happen for another 6 months, well, you got to get on their calendar, it's all the things. And so there could be a lot of different reasons. Now, if a health tech company is on the ball and does talk to payers early and adjusts their study design to incorporate patient-related health outcomes that the payers are actually interested in and would love to see and would cover a technology for, then you shorten that time frame, right? Now it's not 24, 36 months. Yeah, maybe it is 12, 18 months. But lots of factors, lots of variables there.
Nick, I told you we're going to need you. They're going to need you.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere for a while.
If you're listening, you want to be in health tech, you do need the right advice and understand how this operates. Just don't half wing it and expect the results to be, great. Well, again, I mean, any innovator sometimes. And by the way, the idea of like you mentioned something about everybody can have a great idea. Listen, everyone listening, watching around the world, there's 7 billion plus, they all have ideas of everything. If you tell them, at TV, they're going to give you 10,000 potential ideas, but they can be all ideas that are redundant and things like that, and maybe not even feasible. But you're right. It's doing the right studies. A small example. I did actually have it's an invention. It's a simple invention. It was based on a need. And before I went through it, it actually had to vet it out. And we did a research. We had to see if it's available, what's close to it. Is there a potential for the market for it? Not just here and globally. And it took about a few weeks. We got a couple of studies on it before we actually went to file for it. And then we did. And even with that, we marketed, and it's been 3 years, and we still don't have a license for it. So just to tell you, it doesn't work that easy. And while mine was not, actually mine could be literally a health tech, because you can use it. I thought about it for my own mother, and that's how, so that's how it came up with. But
that's
the idea,
where a lot of things are born, right?
Yeah, it was a need, it's available. I mean, people can search it. It's just a lift, kind of home portable lift. That you can actually, get, easily to higher grounds. And so the idea, but to make it, something that is different, that is potentially, that you can have a patent, and I got the utility for 20 years and all that. But it was not easy, but we had to do the studies just to make sure that it's not just an ad hoc idea. Okay, I got an idea. Okay, cool. Well, there's a lot of ideas, but is it even worth investing in it and taking the time or not? And the same thing here. If there are ideas, you have to do all the above. And if you do it correctly, you should eventually get the results. And you have to, in this case, in healthcare, you have to go through regulatory and more. But so you mentioned something about programs that you create to help, these folks kind of like put their products out. If you don't mind, can you share with us some of those examples or some of the things that, that tactics that you use to help? Again, this particular show is probably going to be seen by everybody. Some can be creative, some can be leaders in companies or innovators, or some could be just patients and public that can be at least understanding like what really takes care of me. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's behind the healthcare, and this is a piece of it. So what would be some of those?
Well, so I'll give a couple of examples. I've designed programs in medical device imaging where, it's just new. And, sometimes there are technologies that are not these sort of big ticket items. So it might not even be on the insurance company's radar, right? And so we design a program to educate the payer, to make sure that, when claims are being submitted to the payer, that, there's sufficient information in there. You're sending in medical documentation and you've got information on the technology itself, because otherwise the payer's like, what the heck is this thing? Like, they go to the website and the website is, maybe it's good, maybe it's not. Like, you can't just assume that everybody just ought to know everything about everything, right? There's a lot to keep up with. So there's patient education, patient advocacy work where, if it's a Medicare patient and they have, maybe they're a transplant patient and, they need to take immunosuppressive drugs, right, to keep their organs working. And that drug isn't under, the Medicare drug benefit, but it's this other benefit, and they can't figure it out. And they're just a Medicare beneficiary, and they're, 60 years old. And can you help me? Right. So it really does depend. There are also, on the reimbursement side, like just for the, there's a biller in the hospital who has to figure out what to put on a claim form. And they're like, what is this thing? What code do I use? So we can help various stakeholders, but it's in that early stage when the technology is just new to everybody. And, everybody needs a little bit of help in different ways to kind of make it through.
So Nicole, I just, as you were talking, I'm thinking about, what about when payers, for example, they do contract with providers and they do negotiate rates for different services and, whether diagnostics and lab and all these things. I mean, that could be a good point where they can really establish some of these parameters for anything that they think new and they use, and therefore they can establish those rules initially. So if we agree on something and we have a rate for this, even though it's a new technology, we can make it valuable to us and, maybe put it in the right place. That may also help. And again, I'm not sure if that's happening or not, but, just something that came to my mind.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And sometimes it really does depend, right? So different, providers will have totally different contracts, with the same payer, right? And so, it really does depend, like, how does your contract handle new technologies? Is there a carve out? Is it, something that is similar? You just get paid whatever the other thing gets paid? Like, I don't know. It depends. And those are the things that when you think about best practices as you go into contracting, there are certain things that, a hospital or a doctor's office or a practice can keep in mind when, especially if they're really bullish on new technology and they want to incorporate, they want to be an early adopter of new technology. Well, then you got to take that into your contracts. When you talk with your payers, you've got to consider that.
Well, thank you. And Nicole, there's one thing that comes to mind also, and the same, I guess, focus point or focal point here. The fraud, waste, and abuse, for example, is a big deal. And, that's I think an angle that's always like it's a radar.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And everybody's looking at, what does that mean? Because it is, we've seen it, actually, we've heard of it. I mean, it's on the news, every now and then you hear stories, but there is a tendency to sometimes use devices, services, products, and whatever in excess or code them the wrong way, whatever. So there's that piece of things that people should be aware of. So if they're considering, a device or a tech, whatever, they need to also know, like, what is the use, the frequency, not to get flagged in a way that is not appropriate. Therefore, it's either declined or now you're under investigation, and it could be a problematic thing.
That's right. So there's like, in a lot of ways, there's a right way to do something, and then there are lots and lots of wrong ways to do it, right? And so, then you get lawyers involved, and then there's a lot of gray area, right? And different companies will have different tolerance levels for how much to push the envelope, right? But, on these programs that I design, sometimes doctors call me and they say, well, how much should I charge for this? And I'm like, I'm not telling you what to charge. You decide what to charge. There's no way I'm telling you, right? Now, we can talk about, how do you set charges for other things? Well, use that as you can figure out how to set a charge, but I'm not going to give you a dollar figure. That crosses a line, right? There are certain things that, again, from an anti-kickback statute standpoint, or fraud and abuse and all these other things, there are lines that you don't cross. Now, there are always people who are going to ask, mostly because, and there's nothing malicious in it. They just don't know any better, right? And that's fine. They can always ask. But as far as these programs go, you got to be aware of those compliance related issues and make sure not to cross those.
Well, it's a very sensitive area, and again, sometimes, when you mentioned earlier about doing the due diligence and following all the stuff and doing all the stuff, you got to look at all the aspects. Pricing is one. I mean, to your point, if you produce a product or a tech, and another company maybe overseas is producing a similar, technology, and now I can access it for like half a price, that could be a challenge. Now we can talk about quality. We can talk about a lot of things. And is this device gonna, turn out to be bad, and we have to do recalls and whatever? I mean, that could be a problem. And we've seen that happen. I mean, it's just a very, it's a very, very large realm of potential issues that can happen in this particular world of tech and insurance, and healthcare in general has a lot of sensitivity. Then there's the other piece of, I guess, information and personal information. Sometimes the HIPAA rules and all this stuff do apply too. So you have to be sensitive to every single thing. And you're right. The end consumer, though, may not know all these things. The problem is, it's for most of the people, they don't even know what's behind the scene. This is like all backstage.
Oh, yeah.
The patients and the members, they expect to go to a facility, get services, don't get billed, and that's it.
No, it's so true. And there are so many case studies of things where, the patient, the physician prescribed something. So the patient assumes that the physician prescribed it. Well, they should know if it's covered by my insurance company. I shouldn't expect a bill. When it's like the physician's like, I have no idea. Like, I don't even know what your insurance is. Right? That's somebody else's job to know your insurance. So again, there are a lot of assumptions about what other stakeholders know, don't know, do, don't do. And it is making sure that, if we can bridge that either through some of the programs that I talk about or through educating really early on. Some of the tech companies that I talk to, they're shocked when I say, you could just go to the medical directors and ask them what they want. They're like, I can do that? I'm like,
of course
absolutely, you can do that, And then sometimes they run pilot programs, right? Let's try, this sounds promising. And sometimes the technology companies say, well, we don't have enough data yet. And the insurance company will say, well, we'll work with you. We will conditionally approve for this subset of patients. Let's collect the data together, because win-win, right? How all of that stuff is possible.
Well, it is. And especially in today's world, we have value-based stuff. And a lot of companies would be more than open to such things if your technology, your solution is going to, provide serious results for improving the health of our members. And certainly we can save some dollars there. And that cost can be back to you. So now there is a stake that you have in the game to make it work. There's a lot of ways, and you're right. I mean, as simple as taking a meeting with the medical, team and see what that's what I said. They know what's going on.
Right.
They know the members, they track the members, all the utilization, the types, the cases, the illnesses and all the stuff. And they have the data. I mean, helplines track that closely.
Well, to our point earlier, I mean, health plans are insurance companies. I mean, they have actuaries where their job is just to go through the data. They're swimming in data going back decades. So a lot of this stuff isn't new, but some of the issues that I deal with the new technology companies is, a lot of that past data. What if it doesn't apply to the new technology? Okay, now let's talk. Now we're talking about more innovative partnerships for how do we collect that data? What data do we actually need? And, hey, if it's going to help patients, if it's going to help the members of my plan, payers are like, I want it. You just got to make sure that it actually does what
but definitely. And by the way, I wanted to just go back to the point you mentioned earlier about the doctors not even knowing what the insurance covers. That's actually pretty realistic. That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
Doctors contract, over years, the things change over the time. The benefits change annually. There's ups and downs in the benefits, changes. And, people expect, I'm just going to walk in and walk out with my benefits and this is going to cover. It may not be. Even formularies, drugs, they shift. I mean, today is covered, tomorrow is not covered. The tier changes. Devices can be not covered one year, covered the next day. I mean, next year. People have to be aware. And again, hopefully people can listen to something like this a show and get at least an idea of what to expect and just to set expectations here. But so Nicole, I wanted to ask you a question now for our tech companies or tech, I guess, gurus or tech people that want to get involved into it, or if someone has an idea and they really want to take it to the next level, what would be the advice you would give them, or some of the steps? Obviously, the first advice I'll tell them to go to you, but so,
I'll tell you the questions that I will ask is I will start at what is the problem that you're trying to solve?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because it has to start there, right? Like, what's the gap you're trying to fill? But then secondly, what is the pain point separate from the problem? Okay,
Right.
because the problem, everybody, solution to a problem, everybody can get behind. It's the pain point that is really going to get you traction if you're addressing the pain point. So, in the startup world, they say that there are 3 factors, right, for any tech getting off the ground. The problem, the pain point, the solution that you have, and then the customer, right? So the customer might be like, who's the customer? Is it the physician? I argue that the customer is often the health plan, right? But yeah, you have to identify that. And what they say in the startup world is you hold on very, very closely to the pain point. You hold on very closely to the customer, but you hold your solution loosely, right? You have to modify your solution to address those other 2 legs of the stool. Make sure your solution is not the weak leg of that stool if you want your product idea to be successful in the healthcare environment.
Well, that's an excellent point. And thank you for clarifying that, because again, if someone's listening and, they might like, oh, I think I have a super solution,
Yeah.
I think you might want to consider, these points and understanding. And I like the idea about being loose about the solution, because if your idea is stiff and limited and you can't really adapt it, you might just be out of luck because it may not work.
Yeah, it's a different version of cross your finger strategy. Instead, you really do need to listen to what your end users are telling you about what they need, what their pain points are, and what, all of that kind of stuff. And then you can actually land on something that will make an impact.
And thank you. And by the way, Nicole, you made a super point. The fact that sometimes you don't even know who's the end user here, because it can be a little convoluted, because if a solution is used by the doctor, is really the doctor to make him or her do better, work. Is that really the end user there, or is it that the patient that's going to get the better results? And it does get a little cloudy there, because to me, you can think about it like, well, no, the doctor's going to be happy. They're going to love the solution. Yeah, but is it going to do any extra stuff for the patient? Maybe. Is the plan even going to be happy with the solution, because now it's going to be more money for them? You're right. So there's 3 components that you have to almost add them up and see, like, at what point they all align that it's going to benefit each and every one of them. If it works the 3, I think you're good.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And, a lot of people think of, and again, their heart's in the right place, right? They notice a problem in patient care and they're trying to solve that problem. But in order to get there, you have to consider a lot of different factors, and don't go into that process with blinders on. Just make sure, and hey, if your study design sucks, it sucks. I mean, better to know that way up front than before you get to the FDA. I mean, just, a lot of companies are scared to talk to medical directors, right? They're scared to talk to the specialty societies and all these things. And I'm like, listen, it's better to know. It's better to know. And my role as a consultant and advisor is, unfortunately, to be delivering bad news of that, this isn't going to cut it, or this isn't going to work, or this isn't going to whatever. But I'm happy to deliver that message in those early stages if we can pivot. If we're holding on loosely to the solution and we can modify, we can do additional validation, different use cases, other things to make that a viable product, then we're good, right? Then it's win-win.
And I have to say, actually, you're not a message of doom here, because in the essence, you are doing them a favor by telling them, that this is not going to work, because you're right. That's actually, I would take that positively. If you're telling me it's not going to work based on the expertise, that means I got to work on my stuff. And now I know I'm not going, to your point, blind and just going all the way 10 steps further and just only to find out I'm like in a dead end. I can probably open a different door and maybe make amendments to things and make it work. So again, obviously someone is really, closed-minded, and you come back like, oh, this is sad. I put all this much energy and effort, and my idea is the most, well, maybe that's it. Right. But
Yeah.
people have to have an open mind about the idea that, and that's what I said earlier. It's like, you got to vet out things, and you ask the people that know. This business better than most. And, to your point, if you go to the end users and see what exactly their expectation would be, if such a solution would be available to them, they're going to tell you, oh, I love it. I'll jump on it. I'll have it today. And the plan's like,
That's
yes,
right.
sign me up. I'm in.
We all agree, right?
That's it. But you can ask the questions. You're right. It's not taboo. You can go out there and find, advisory, boards, and get people, from the community. And you're right, specialty, folks, and you have the plans. You're right. I mean, if you want them to pay for it, they might as well have them have a say in it.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. Yeah. Go to them early and often. They'll talk to you. Yeah.
Well, so to that effect, I mean, if someone comes to you right now and says, I have this great idea and I'd like to do this, do you actually facilitate that? Would you facilitate that?
Definitely. I mean, so there are a couple of things, sometimes it's my own personal experience working so many years with health plans and Medicare. Like, I can tell them up front, I can look at a study and I can say, yeah, this is not going to fly, or you're probably going to need something else. Or, from the health plan's perspective, this is what they're going to need. And this is what the shortcomings might be. And then there is a separate step where we could go ahead and set up calls with medical directors or benefit managers, or like lots of different stakeholders, right? Whoever the stakeholder needs to be, whoever we determine the end user to be, right? And do really informed interviews with people who are willing to sit down with us. And, they have, again, a stake in this, in that they're willing to spend time up front, right? To have tech companies do this right, instead of all this time on, downstream, where this is a technology that they're not going to cover for one reason or another, and then have to deal with that mess. Health plans don't want to deal with that mess.
Well, it's an excellent point. And actually, for people listening and watching right now, if you're into the world and you want to be an inventor or innovative in the healthcare space here, specifically in healthcare, you got to remember something. If you're going to find a dead end at the end, that no one is going to buy your product or pay for your product, you'll be wasting a lot of time, money, and energy. I'm probably stating the obvious here, but understanding that is really what's going to happen. As you said, cross your finger and see what happens. That doesn't work. You got to do it right. And we have people that can help us through this process to get to it and understand what would be the right way to do it and get the results. That's it. I mean, you've covered it all. I mean, I think that's a pretty solid process that people need to be aware of. And again, for our audiences and viewers right now, I mean, doesn't matter what spectrum you're in. Are you in the consumer side, in the provider side, the helpline side, or the actual tech side? This can give you a little bit of an understanding of what to look for and how things are working. And I think that's important for everyone to just take home.
Yeah, thank you.
So Nicole, I know we've actually exceeded the hour, and it went quick. So are there any other additional things that you would like to share, before we close today's show?
I don't think so. I mean, my big takeaways is I want to make sure that people know that, there are no bad guys here, right? I mean, if there's one thing that I've learned working with so many different stakeholders over so many years, is that when you sit in somebody else's shoes, you really have an appreciation for what their perspective is and what they're trying to accomplish within this healthcare ecosystem. And that there are bridges, there are ways to bridge the different, what seem like competing priorities. And, to just get on it early, stop throwing good money after bad, just pause, see, if we can talk to the health plans early, then, maybe we can save ourselves a lot of grief. And that's definitely a viable pathway.
Thank you, Nicole. What I do want to say this. I think this concept, I mean, your real formula or method and your message is so clear. And I think that that can apply beyond just the borders and our healthcare system, because that's probably true for every other healthcare system in the world. And, you know, because I'm sure that they face similar issues anywhere in Canada, Europe, you name it, right? That's one. So that being said, are you open in terms of services to the world, or is it just that you focus in the U.S. market?
I do focus on the US market. And so a lot of the mechanics of some of this stuff is specific to the US.
Good.
I've worked lots of times with OUS companies who are trying to bring their products into the US, though. So that is another area. But I don't work in Canadian reimbursement, EU reimbursement, or anything like that, just US.
No, perfect. And the reason I'm asking, because we come into the industry and I always want to make sure that people have access to you and your services. So if you don't mind, tell us how people can get hold of you if they need, you know, your services, and whatever part of the world they're in. I mean, whether then the private, you know, sector, healthcare, tech, you name it. I guess your clients are all health, you know, tech, you know, companies, right? Primarily.
Yes, absolutely. Health tech. So yeah, companies who are interested in launching products here in the US, or again, investors or founders who want to validate some of their assumptions about how healthcare here works. You can find me on LinkedIn, Nicole Coustier, or go to my website, nicolecoustier.com.
And I'll have that link in the description of the show. So folks, you know, that will be a quick access to it. Again, I hope that a lot of people can benefit from this. And you're right. I mean, investors, we didn't talk about that, but I mean, yeah, if you're going to put money in, in a project, you want to make sure it's going to be viable for you. So, hey, listen,
that's right.
And there's a lot of investments that go into the healthcare and health tech. So yes, I mean, please do. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for a great hour here and a lot of insights. And I hope we've delivered a good message to people and educated folks about, you know, how this whole thing, you know, works in the real life. And that's about it. Any last questions or last words before we part here?
No, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed my time here.
All right. Well, thank you, folks. Thank you for, you know, joining us today and watching, you know, on the iHealth channel, as well as listening on iHealth Radio. I'm your host, Hurricane H, and we'll be talking soon. Next guest, next show, next topic. Bye for now.